The elevator in Katharine Voss's building hadn't worked in 11 days. Not the main elevator. That one was fine, polished chrome and soft lighting, the kind that made visiting executives feel like the building itself was welcoming them. The broken one was the service elevator, the one tucked behind the north stairwell, the one that Katharine used every single morning because her wheelchair didn't fit comfortably in the main car when the doors were crowded with people pretending not to stare. 11 days of being routed through the loading dock entrance like a delivery. She hadn't said a word about it to anyone, because that was how she operated. You notice things. You file them away. You don't make a scene, not because you're weak, but because a scene gives people something to focus on other than the actual problem. The actual problem, this particular morning, was not the elevator. The actual problem walked into her office at 8:47 a.m., wearing a gray fleece pullover with a paint stain near the left cuff, carrying a clipboard that had seen better years, and introducing himself as the site supervisor from Halloran Contracting. "Miss Voss," he said, looking around her office with the careful, unhurried attention of someone cataloging a room rather than admiring it. "I'm Sawyer Finch. I'm here about the structural assessment." Katharine looked up from her laptop. The assessment was scheduled for 9. I know. He didn't apologize for being early. He just stood there, holding his clipboard, giving the impression of a man who had learned a long time ago that early was safer than on time, and that on time was a gamble. "Your facilities manager let me in. I can wait in the hall if you need me to." "You're already in," she said. He nodded once, like that settled it, and turned his attention to the northwest corner of the room, where a hairline crack had appeared in the plaster 2 weeks ago, traveled 6 inches across the wall, and then stopped, as if it had gotten bored. Katharine watched him crouch down near the baseboard, run 2 fingers along the seam between the floor and the wall, press gently in a way that wasn't gentle at all, but was precise. He had the hands of someone who had been using them for work since before he was old enough to drive. "How long has this been here?" he asked without turning around. "The crack appeared about 2 weeks ago. The building is 40 years old. My facilities team said it was cosmetic." He didn't respond to that. He stood up slowly, moved to the window, checked the frame with the flat of his hand. Then he crossed the room, past her desk, past her, without the slight hesitation that most people had when they realized the CEO couldn't get out of her chair to follow them, and pressed on the far wall near the electrical panel. "Your facilities team," he said, making a small note on his clipboard, "is wrong." The words landed in the room without drama. He said it the same way he might have said the paint here is eggshell, not matte, just a fact, just what he could see. Katharine set down her coffee cup. "Explain that," she said. He turned to face her then, and for the first time she got a clear look at him. Mid-30s, maybe, with the kind of tiredness around the eyes that wasn't laziness, but was something closer to a person running on schedule because the schedule required it. A small scar above his right eyebrow. He hadn't shaved this morning, but not in a way that suggested carelessness. More like he'd had other priorities. "The crack isn't in the plaster," he said. "It's reading through from the support structure behind it. See the angle?" He gestured. That kind of diagonal pattern in a load-bearing wall suggests settling that isn't cosmetic. It's either a foundation issue underneath this section of the building, or there's been some interference with the support column behind that wall. He paused. "When was the last time anyone accessed the column housing?" Katharine was quiet for a moment. "I'd need to check the maintenance logs," she said. "I'd start there." She studied him. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't talking to her like she was a client to be managed or a woman to be reassured. He was just telling her what the wall was telling him, and it was such a rare quality in a person that she had to remind herself not to let the relief of it show on her face. "What's the worst case?" she asked. "Worst case, you have a progressive settlement issue that nobody caught because they were looking at the symptom instead of the source. Worst case, the column has been compromised, accidentally or otherwise." He met her eyes. "I'd want to pull the panel and look before I gave you a number." "Do it," she said. He nodded and went to make a call. His name was Sawyer Finch, and he had a daughter named Bex, who was 6 years old, and had her father's habit of going very quiet when she was paying serious attention to something. Katharine learned this not by asking but by observing, which was how she learned most things. On his second visit to the building, a Thursday, he arrived with a lunch bag that was obviously packed for two. A small thermos with a cartoon on the side, a sandwich cut diagonally. He noticed her noticing and said, without embarrassment, "School let out early. She's with the building manager downstairs. He's got a desk fan she's been fascinated with for 40 minutes. How old is she? 6. Going on 43. Katharine's CFO, a man named Lawrence Pruitt. Sharp, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore his competence like a suit that cost too much, appeared in the doorway at that moment and looked at Sawyer with the specific blankness that expensive people reserved for tradespeople. "Ms. Voss," Pruitt said, "the Meridian partners are on their way up. Tell them 5 minutes." Pruitt's gaze moved to Sawyer again, brief and dismissive, before he disappeared. Sawyer didn't react. He'd already turned back to the wall panel he'd opened and was photographing something with his phone, the focused calm of a man who had learned early that what other people thought of him was a noise he couldn't afford to hear. Katharine watched him and thought, "This is a person who does not perform." In her world, the world of executive boards and acquisition meetings, and quarterly calls where everyone was always slightly more confident than the data warranted, that quality was rarer than she could explain to anyone who hadn't spent 20 years inside it. She had built Voss Capital from a 2-person advisory firm into a mid-sized asset management company with 4 offices and 300 employees. She had done it in 12 years. She had done most of it from a wheelchair, which she'd needed since a car accident when she was 31. An accident on a rain-slicked bridge, a truck that came across the center line, and a surgeon afterward who had been very kind and very clear about what the damage to her spine meant going forward. What it meant, she had decided, was nothing about her capacity and everything about other people's assumptions. Pruitt had been with the company for 6 years. He was brilliant with numbers, persuasive in a boardroom, and had the loyalty of a man who understood that Katharine was the reason the company existed at all, or so she had believed. The maintenance logs came back 3 days later, and Sawyer read them in her office with the same focused stillness he brought to everything, and when he was done, he set them on her desk and said, very carefully, "Who authorized the reinforcement work on column C7 in 2023? Katharine looked at the log. The authorization signature was illegible. The contractor listed was a company called Arcline Structural, a name she had never heard. "This isn't in any of our records," she said. "Our facilities team didn't flag any column work that year." "That's because your facilities team didn't order it," Sawyer said. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. "Someone accessed that column," he continued, "and did work on it that isn't up to code. The connection points were altered. I don't know if it was incompetence or something deliberate, but the effect is the same. The column is carrying less load than it should be, and it's been doing it for 2 years. He paused. "If there's a significant seismic event, or if the building takes on a different load configuration, new equipment on that floor, for example, you have a problem." "The new server infrastructure," Katharine said. He looked at her. "We're installing it next month. Floor 12. Directly above this section." Sawyer was quiet for a moment. "You should delay that installation." "I will." Katharine looked at the log again, at the illegible signature, at the name Arcline Structural, which she had never seen in any company document. Sawyer. Who would have access to authorize work like this without it going through normal channels? "Someone with building access and the ability to bring in an outside crew," he said. "Someone who knew the maintenance cycle well enough to bury it." She looked up. "Someone internal," she said. He met her eyes and didn't look away. "That would be my read." Katharine did not panic. She had not panicked since she was 31 years old and lying in a hospital bed being told the news, and she had decided then, in that particular way that catastrophic moments can clarify a person's character, that panic was a luxury she could not afford and did not want. She called her attorney. She called her head of security. She did not call Lawrence Pruitt. She asked her security director to pull every access log for the building's maintenance systems over the past 3 years and cross-reference them with employee credentials. She asked quietly. She asked in a way that didn't explain why. Then she waited. The answer came on a Wednesday, in a file that her security director delivered in person rather than by email, which was how Katharine knew it was the kind of answer she'd been hoping wasn't there. Pruitt had accessed the maintenance system 17 times in 14 months, using a secondary credential set that had been created without IT oversight. He had communicated twice with a company registered to a shell entity in Delaware. A company that, when unraveled through 3 layers of registration, connected back to a private equity group that had been positioning for an aggressive acquisition of Voss Capital for the better part of 2 years. The column access, the structural compromise, the server installation scheduled for next month, which would have triggered a load event on a column that was no longer fit to bear it. Not an accident, a timeline. Katharine sat with this for a long time, alone in her office, long after the building had mostly emptied. Outside the windows, the city moved the way cities always did. Indifferent, continuous, without interest in what was happening inside this particular room. She thought about Pruitt sitting across from her in strategy meetings, nodding with that careful, considered expression he had, offering input that was always technically sound and never quite fully honest about where it was pointing. She thought about the Meridian acquisition she had turned down 8 months ago. Turned it down on instinct, because something about the structure felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate at the time. She understood it now. Meridian had been a setup, a way to tie up the company's liquidity before the real move. She had said no by intuition, and someone had decided to engineer a different route. She called her attorney again. This time she told him everything. There were things Katharine had never told anyone about the accident. That it happened 6 weeks after she'd made her first real hire. The first person she'd brought on who wasn't herself, the moment the company became a we instead of an I. That she had driven herself home that night because she was exhausted and proud and did not want to share the quiet of it with anyone. That when she woke up in the hospital and understood what had happened to her body, the first thing she felt wasn't fear but fury, the clean, cold kind that is almost a relief, because it tells you that you're still yourself. She had channeled the fury into building something, and she was going to channel it again now. On a Friday afternoon, Sawyer came to do a final inspection of the column before she filed the engineering report with the city. He brought Bex with him. School was out for a teacher planning day, and Bex sat in the hallway outside Katharine's office with a book and a determination not to be in the way that was so exaggerated and formal that Katharine had to press her mouth together to keep from smiling. "She's reading about bridges," Sawyer said. He said it in the tone of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by his daughter and had arrived at something closer to sustained wonder. "How old is she again?" 6. She went through a phase with volcanoes, then tectonic plates, and now bridges. He looked at Bex through the glass door, turning a page. "I'm worried about what comes next." "Structural engineering, maybe," Katharine said. He looked at her with something in his expression she couldn't quite categorize. "Maybe," he said. She asked him to come in and close the door. She told him what she had found. Not all of it, the legal process would handle the specifics, but enough. The unauthorized column work, the shell company. The person inside her organization who had made the calculation that Katharine Voss could be outmaneuvered. Sawyer listened without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "The work on C7, he said finally. "When I saw it, my first read was that it was incompetent. The connections weren't right, the materials were substandard, but the more I looked at it," he stopped. "It wasn't incompetent, it was just made to look incompetent. Someone wanted it to read as shoddy contractor work. Accidental. Easy to dismiss as a renovation mistake. They almost succeeded," Katharine said. "You delayed the server installation. You told me to." He looked at her steadily. "You didn't have to listen." "I always listen," she said, "to the person who's looking at the actual problem instead of the surface of it." Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the small, real shift of two people recognizing something about each other that is easier to feel than to name. "What happens now?" he asked. "My attorney and the Financial Crimes Unit are meeting next week. Pruitt will have an opportunity to cooperate or not. The private equity group will be investigated." She paused. "The company will be fine. It's been through harder." He nodded. "And the column? Your report goes to the city engineer's office Monday. We'll have a remediation plan within 2 weeks." She looked at him. "I'd like Halloran to handle the structural work if you're available." "We're available," he said. And then, after a moment, "I should go get Bex. She's been sitting out there for 40 minutes. She hasn't moved once," Katharine said. "I've been watching." He smiled, the first real one she'd seen from him, which meant it landed differently than it would have otherwise. "She gets that from her mother," he said, and it was said without grief, exactly, but with the particular weight of something that had been carried long enough to become familiar. Katharine didn't ask. It wasn't the moment. But she noted it, the way she noted everything, filed it away in the part of herself that was patient and careful and had learned that the most important things rarely needed to be rushed. The board meeting was on a Thursday. Katharine had asked for an emergency session, which in practice meant that 8 people sat around a long table, trying to look like they hadn't been surprised by the agenda. The agenda was 3 items: a summary of the security findings, a resolution to authorize cooperation with the financial crimes investigation, and a proposal to create a new division within Voss Capital focused on accessibility infrastructure investment, a sector Katharine had been watching quietly for 2 years, and which had now become, in the way that certain events clarify certain decisions, an obvious next move. The Pruitt situation was addressed first. The room was mostly quiet through it. There were questions, careful, lawyerly questions from board members who understood that their job in this moment was to demonstrate oversight, not alarm. Katharine answered them fully and without editorializing. She had prepared for this meeting the same way she prepared for everything, completely and slightly further ahead than anyone expected. When the third item came up, the Accessibility Infrastructure Division, one of the board members, a man named Court Ashby, who had been on the board since before Katharine had rebuilt the company, looked at her over the rim of his glasses with the expression of a person about to ask a question they already suspected they knew the answer to. "What brought this particular initiative to the forefront now?" he asked. Katharine considered the question. "Someone tried to use a structural vulnerability to take something from me," she said, "and the person who spotted the vulnerability before it became a disaster was someone whose expertise nobody in this building took seriously at first glance." She paused. "That's a pattern I've seen before. Overlooked expertise. Underestimated capacity. I'd like to invest in the infrastructure that changes that pattern, literally and otherwise." Court Ashby looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. The vote was unanimous. 2 months later, Sawyer Finch stood in a conference room on the 14th floor of the Voss Capital building and presented a proposal for a contract he had spent 6 weeks developing, with input from 3 engineers, 2 urban planners, and his daughter, who had declared that bridges were more interesting than buildings, but had nonetheless contributed 2 observations about load distribution that were, he admitted, structurally sound. The proposal was for a pilot program, a structural audit and retrofit initiative targeting 12 mid-sized commercial buildings in the city whose accessibility infrastructure was outdated, unsafe, or, in several documented cases, quietly non-functional in the way that things are non-functional when no one with decision-making power has ever had to use them. Katharine sat at the head of the table. She had read the proposal twice. She had annotated it. When Sawyer finished presenting, she asked 3 questions: technical, specific, the kind that told him she had done the reading and not just skimmed it. He answered them. She looked down at the last page of the proposal, which had a single line at the bottom that he hadn't mentioned during the presentation. It read, "These repairs are not cosmetic." She looked up. He was watching her with that same steady quality that she had noticed the first morning when he had crouched down near her baseboard and told her, without apology, that the people she was paying to protect the building had been looking at the wrong thing. No, she said, they're not. She signed the contract. Outside the window, 14 floors up, the city spread itself in every direction. Ordinary and enormous and full of structures that people moved through every day without thinking about what was holding them up. Katharine Voss thought about it. She had always thought about it. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something that wasn't just competence or momentum or the satisfaction of a problem solved. She felt like the building she was in was actually built for her, and that, she thought, was only the beginning of what could be fixed.